Pastor Jeff, week 2 of Inconceivable, and
How many people do you think have thought about Princess Bride so far?
oh, I'm assuming everybody.
Have you thought about? I mean, so your generation
Oh
likes it too.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, the second I heard the title, I yelled in my head, Inconceivable.
You know, when my daughter
Uh-huh.
asked me for something, you know what my reply still is?
Is that,
As you wish.
oh, nice. Yeah,
Because
yeah.
that was one of her favorite
Uh-huh.
movies,
Yeah.
and she knows exactly what I mean by that. As you wish.
That's really funny.
Although she
My
did
dad
ask
doesn't
me
say
to
that to
smack her
me.
brother one time, and I didn't say as you wish.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sir.
That's funny. But yeah, we were week 2. You just finished your message, and out the gate, you go straight for Matthew's genealogy of
Yeah.
Jesus, which you really elaborate more on that. Because usually, I mean, let's be honest, most of us skip chapter 1, that part of Matthew, because it's just this person, and usually as we read it, we're kind of like, can we just get to Jesus doing miracles part?
Yeah.
But you really focus on that. I don't know if you want to elaborate more.
Hey, you know what? In fact, in my little crisis of faith in my 20s, I remember the first time somebody pointed out to me that Matthew's genealogy and Luke's genealogy were different.
Mm-hmm.
That, because I hadn't studied genealogies, that kind of bothered me
Yeah.
until I realized how genealogies were used
Yeah.
in the time of Jesus.
Yeah.
And there's so much more that we didn't mention.
Mhm.
There's actually a numeric code
Mhm.
in the genealogies, the names listed, because in Hebrew they're given values,
Right.
and you keep seeing these numbers 7 and 14, and
Mhm.
it's a beautiful thing. They're very well constructed, but they're constructed to communicate a message.
Yeah.
Since Matthew's writing to the Jews, he's obviously going to give them Jewish messaging,
Right.
or
right,
especially related to the Messiah.
Right.
Luke is writing to Theophilus,
Mhm.
who is evidently a judge,
Yeah.
who he's trying to convince about the uniqueness of Christ, his death, burial, resurrection.
Mhm.
So they don't, it's important to say they do not contradict each
Right.
other.
Right,
They
right.
instead focus on certain families for different reasons.
Yeah.
So I started looking at the genealogy probably 15 years ago. Sometime I was a teaching pastor in Savannah, Georgia,
Uh-huh.
and someone had asked me to do a series on Christmas during December on Matthew 1 and 2 and Luke 1 and 2. So
Yeah.
I said, well, the genealogy, let's take a look. So I started reading and looking and then comparing, and
Yeah.
started realizing, wow, I see what Matthew's trying to do.
Right.
And so once you realize that Matthew is trying to express to the people, which would have been very difficult.
Mhm.
Matter of fact, Matthew would have had to have written this, not during the time he was walking with Jesus,
Mhm.
but later on when things became clearer.
Yeah.
And we know that he did.
Uh-huh.
So as he began to write down all the things the Holy Spirit would remind them of, John 14, John 16,
Yeah.
he records the genealogy in a way to let the Israel know that, you know, God's grace is not just for us.
Right.
It's for all people.
Mhm.
By the way, do you remember Rahab? Do you remember Tamar? Do you remember Uriah? You know, Uriah, so when the people came into the land, evidently there were Hittites that joined David, that
Yeah.
had such respect for his leadership, that
Mhm.
joined him and ultimately became a believer in Yahweh.
Yeah.
We forget that because I was asked one time, do you think that God's mission, even in the Old Testament, was a missionary one?
Mhm.
And the answer is yes and no. Yes, in the sense that the message of Yahweh was for anyone who would come in.
Right.
But the primary purpose of the Old Testament was God demonstrating what he's like through one people group, and that is the Hebrews.
Mhm.
And so, you know, one of the things we forget again is why. It goes back to this question: why when God sent his people into the promised land, Israel,
Mhm.
why would he tell them to annihilate
Mhm.
everybody?
Yeah.
And as we've said before, that's because we don't have a good understanding of tribes like the Philistines or the Amalekites,
Right.
who were so evil.
Mhm.
They were burning their own babies on the altar of Moloch.
Yeah.
They were the way they participated in warfare.
Yeah.
And it's like God is saying to them, we cannot let this perpetuate. We need to wipe out this generation and start again.
Mhm.
And so as you go through the Bible, you see this God, but there's always a chance of repentance, and there's always a chance. God is long suffering. It's not like, how long did God reveal himself to the Philistines, to the Amalekites?
Right.
We have no idea. in hopes of repentance.
Yeah.
And what God does in the Old Testament, he gives us an example of that when Abraham said, if I find one person in the city that's righteous, will you spare the city?
Yeah. Yeah.
He goes from 50 to 1. God said, yeah, if you find one, and there's not one.
Right,
So we have
right.
no idea
Mhm.
how God has worked. But when you come to Matthew, suddenly Matthew gets it, that God's heart has always been for all people, even though
Right.
he's demonstrated the relationship through Israel.
Right.
God, no one is too far from God that they can't come near.
Mhm.
And it's a real religious arrogance to somehow think you deserve to be near to God and somebody
Right.
else doesn't. We're all sinners.
Mhm.
But the church practices that in theory, but not in reality.
Right. Right.
So as you go through the genealogy, and Matthew includes these names, he's trying to show you, man, there's some pretty bad people in
Right.
Jesus' genealogy, and yet they're included. And you
Yeah.
don't have to include them.
Mhm.
The way
Mhm.
genealogies were written, you can keep all the women and all the Gentiles out, no problem. You can just put the fathers, so-and-so beget so-and-so, but he tells the full story. He wants you to remember that there are people associated that we would not associate with,
Right.
that are part of the line of King David and ultimately the Messiah, as a way to say, this is the year of Jubilee. Remember, verse 17 ends with, there are 14 generations, and it ends up being the 49 years, the 50th year, the year of Jubilee.
Yeah.
So Matthew's trying to tell you, guess what? All debts are forgiven, all
Right.
sins forgiven. The captives are set free,
Yeah.
both Jewish and Gentile.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so that's the message that comes from the genealogy, that God, the gospel is good news, not good advice.
Right.
The good
right.
news is that we can all come near to God,
Yeah.
and that it's for all people,
Yeah.
and that it provides you the ultimate rest.
Yeah.
So it's a good genealogy, it's a good
Yeah.
story, but you won't see that
Yeah.
just in reading the text. You'll have to do your
Right.
study.
You have to do.
And
in-depth
you'll also have to
study.
be familiar with Old Testament. You'll have to
Right.
know who Tamar is, who
Right.
Rahab is, and why Matthew decides to mention Bathsheba.
Right.
That's uncanny.
Right. Right.
Why do I need to know Bathsheba? Just tell me David, Solomon, and go on
Right.
down, because he
Right.
wants you to remember the story. Same is true with Tamar.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. I think of like him using Bathsheba and not really utilizing like King David.
King
Like,
David, yeah.
Yeah. Let me remind you.
King David.
The man after God's own heart. Like, no.
Here's
instead
what he did.
goes, yeah. Exactly. He's like, remember what he did, but out of ultimately the way I see it is kind of like the Gospel of John, of like really emphasizing this, that God's in the mess of things,
Yeah.
and he
Oh,
did
yeah.
so with the Messiah and perfected that. I think something that I think is going to be really, really impactful is understanding that the numbers and understanding the year of Jubilee.
Yeah.
All debts are forgiven. Exactly.
All
Like you said,
debts.
everything's forgiven. And yet Matthew's tying all of that up, saying, look at Jesus is that person for
Yeah.
all people.
He is the Jubilee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Drew, I think about the impact of or the application of this. We are living in such a different time, and I wonder if every generation said that.
right.
I wonder if my parents looked at me and thought, "Man, there's no hope for the world if this is what
Right.
And I'm sure there's truth in that.
Yeah.
It is so different now because we don't talk.
Mhm.
This cancel culture is huge, man.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
we don't want to talk and reason.
Right.
We just want to, if we come across somebody that's not like us, we just want to do this.
Mhm.
Go
Mhm.
away.
Correct.
No
Yeah.
need talking. Let's not have a logical. Let's just throw insults at each other, call each
Yeah.
other names, and move on.
Right.
I don't remember it being that way.
Right.
And now here's where we are. So the question is now, how do I convince someone who doesn't really care about God, believe God? How do I talk to them about God?
Right.
Because
Right.
when it just makes them mad. And this is what my point a few weeks ago, that the message that we bring will compel a lot of people,
Right.
but it'll also repel.
Mhm.
And that's where even Jesus said in the days of the disciples, shake the dust off your feet and go to the next town.
Yeah.
Some people are not going to hear you.
Mhm.
You can't, I'm going to say waste your time. You might be a link in the chain, just don't lose it with them.
Right.
You just need to move on.
Mhm.
But some people are going to hear the gospel.
Yeah.
They're going to hear this good news, and they're going to say, man, this is what I've been waiting to hear.
Yeah.
I'm a mess. I got so much wrong in my life, so
Yeah.
much sin in my life. I've been abused. I've abused others. Something's got to change.
Yeah.
They hear the gospel and they run to it.
Yeah.
While others hear the gospel and they're offended by it.
Right.
What do you mean I'm a
Right.
man? What do you mean I got it? I'm no worse than anybody else.
Yeah.
So you have to understand that there is a there's a soil, isn't there?
Yeah.
There's a soil
Mhm.
that's ready to receive the gospel,
Yeah.
to take deep root and grow. But the other three types of soil never going to penetrate.
Right.
And so you have you live your life, and you bring the message of the gospel more in the way that you live than what you say, and that will compel the people who are ready to hear the gospel.
Right. Yeah. The
Um,
sensitive hearts that are in proximity to when you present the gospel or when you're Christ-like, uh, I always find are the secret conversations after, somebody coming up to you and saying,
Mm.
"Hey," even though like for as us as pastors and preachers, when we present the gospel, we think we're casting this big net and we're going to get a lot of fish or we're going to get all these things, but then we don't, or we get criticized or we get all of this stuff. But then there's always that one person
That's
who
right.
comes by and you're like,
Yeah.
okay, God, that was that person.
Our job is to scatter the seed.
Right.
Whatever happens, happens.
Yeah.
And my bigger concern in my own life as you
Mhm.
as you hear a message like this is there's power in transformation, but man, I sure get disappointed when there are areas of my life. Here I am, 58 years old. Why am I still struggling with these same areas?
Mhm.
Now, there are progress in other areas, but some areas I think, and Drew, I've started to think that, and I hinted at this a little bit, but I couldn't expound on it. I said, what Jesus demands, he requires.
Mhm. Mhm.
He demands righteousness, so he gives it
Yeah.
in the form of the cross and forgiveness of sins.
Mhm.
The second kind of righteousness is the sanctification.
Right.
How does he give that to me? And you know that I really believe he gives that to me by life experiences.
Mhm.
He doesn't
Mhm.
just zap me with all of a sudden the power to do the right thing all the time,
Yeah. Yeah.
but instead it's the potter and the clay. He's
Right.
constantly working. And
Right.
some people will achieve greater than others, but and yet remember the parable of the vineyard.
Mhm.
We're all still the same in the eyes of God. We're still in his family. He's just working on all of us.
Right.
And I
Right.
wish I could have had power. Wish I could have had time to expand
Yeah. Yeah.
that idea that while he's changing in the world,
Mhm.
he's changing us as well.
Right.
You've heard me use before the story of Robin Hood.
Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
how Robin Hood is away fighting the battle.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, King Richard is away fighting the battles, and while he's away, people say that he's not the real king,
Yeah.
that somebody usurps his authority,
Mhm.
and because of that, there's a band of believers, Robin Hood and his merry men,
Yeah.
who try to tell the people, hey, no, this is not the way it is. King Richard is going to return, he's going to restore everything.
Yeah.
And then King Richard comes home, and I always say, now what does King Richard do? Does he tell everybody, all right, let's go, I'm going to take you to a new place? No.
Mhm.
He
Right.
doesn't say that. He says, no, I'm going to fix things right here. We're going to restore
Yeah.
the rightful owner, the rightful king.
Yeah.
And for all of those who have been bandits while he's been away, now they're going to come on the inner circle.
Yeah.
Well, that's telling people or making them believe that heaven is the king comes back and he says, "Oh, this is a mess. I'm going to take you this way far away. We're all going to live happily together."
Yeah.
That's not the message of the gospel. The message of
Right.
the gospel in Revelation is that no, I'm going to come back and restore what's rightfully mine.
Yeah.
So the good that you see here is kind of a deposit about what will one day be.
Mm.
As a result, sin has tainted things, but one day when the Savior returns, there's going to be a new world
Yeah.
order. There's a new order of things. As I've said before, the word translated new is not brand new, totally other, but it's a renewed, refurbished. So people ask me, where's heaven? I say, you're sitting on it. He will come back, and this is good what he's done,
Right.
but he will come back and restore all things.
Right. Yeah.
And so he's doing the same thing in your individual lives. That's
Yeah.
the power
Yeah.
of sanctification and righteousness. And that happens through life events.
Right.
Be
Right.
patient with yourself. God's patient with you.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And it kind of goes with what you were saying about religion is due, Jesus is done.
Yeah. It's an old one, but a goodie.
Yeah. Yeah. And that really, I think, solidifies not only his genealogy, but who he is, why God sent him was not for us to do religion or to constantly do these things in order to be right with God or in order, to live a good life, but to realize that Jesus has already done everything that was required for us just to live in the kingdom of heaven here and now.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important for us to really, really understand. You touch on that story of the person in prison.
Yeah.
You wrote the letter to him,
Yeah.
and this kind of goes along with it. And you kind of you elaborate that you actually got a lot more criticized by Christians than you did by your
Absolutely.
secular friends.
Absolutely.
And so why do you think we still have, as I guess you could say Christian society, why is it that we still have this religion do part? Like you did the wrong thing, or you know,
Yeah. Believe it or not, Christians, everybody has coping mechanisms.
mhm,
And because we're dealing with this idea that there's a death cloud hanging over us. So the
mhm,
secular world has a coping mechanism. They turn to romance, they turn to money,
yeah,
power,
yeah,
position, and they kind of drown out the idea, the thought that one day I'm going to die
yeah,
with the idea of I'm going to pursue all these things to
mhm,
fulfill
mhm.
me. And of course, it all goes back in the box in the end.
Right.
For the Christ follower, the gospel is delightfully inconceivable
Mm,
in the sense that you lose control.
mhm,
So I don't like the fact that I don't control my own salvation.
mm,
I like to think that, you know what, I can be assured that I'm going to be good with God because I have lived a good life.
yeah,
I have done the right thing.
mhm,
So I deserve to be in.
right, right,
Okay. So when they see somebody who's evil
yeah,
in their mind,
mhm,
have an opportunity to get in, see, they can't deal with that. But wait
yeah,
a minute. If they can get in,
mhm,
well, then what assurance do I have?
right,
Because they've not done that, and you're telling me they're in.
mhm,
So, I
yeah,
don't
yeah,
get it.
yeah,
I've done all this. Listen now. I've wasted my life
yeah,
trying to be good. You see this? I've wasted my life trying to be good.
mhm,
I could have been doing all the things they've been doing. They get into, what's going on. It's because you never really grapple with the gospel.
mhm,
That the gospel tells you that you're saved, and it gives you a freedom to pursue righteousness,
mhm,
not to earn salvation, but because it is the best way to live.
mhm, yeah,
The joy, the peace, and everything you're looking for, if you think that you've given up what the secular world worships
yeah,
to get what only you can find through the gospel, you've not really ever allowed the gospel to get into your head.
right, right, right,
Isn't it amazing?
yeah,
So it's a controlling issue, but it's also the idea that I've sacrificed so much. I could have been
mhm, mhm.
womanizing. I could have been out there gaining money and doing everything everybody else does, and I gave all that up for Christ.
Yeah, right,
Now he gets in.
and
He
yeah,
did it.
exactly, and then
See,
comparing that
you
to
don't get the gospel yet.
yeah, exactly, which, not to do a total shift, but something I really, really liked is you focused a lot about the angels telling the shepherds, and the shepherds, their place in society is really,
Really low.
really, really
Really
low,
low.
and really emphasizing this point of the gospel message is not top down, it's actually from the bottom up.
Bottom up. Yeah.
And how the shepherds are the ones that are going to be spreading the gospel message. Obviously, as a pastor, it really related
Yeah.
to me because oftentimes we look at pastors as on the stage with the lights, with everything
We're the
going for
shepherds.
them. Yeah, but we're really the ones low with the people who identify as hitting the lowest part of, or how they say it, being in the bottom. You know.
Yeah. The thought is that the reason the lower echelons of the society receive the gospel so easily is because that's the only hope they have.
Mm,
Somebody said that to me once, and I said, "Okay,
mm,
what's your point?
yeah.
What's the point?
Yeah.
Maybe you put your hope in something that's going to die and dissipate.
Yeah.
Their hope's in something that's going to last for eternity. So,
Right.
okay, maybe they're more open to it because you're blinded. I
Right.
mean, some of those conversations are, and maybe the shepherds, maybe the announcement came to them because they would have listened.
Yeah, right.
Right,
exactly.
everybody was like,
Yeah.
"What's going on here?" But I'm assuming they're out talking to God all the time. You're in the field for hours by yourself.
Right. Yeah.
But the thing that I hope in this message, in this series, is that especially in this message, that you'd realize the gospel really is inconceivable.
Mm, mm,
It really is. I
yeah.
mean, you can't make this stuff up.
Yeah.
That God would become a man,
Mhm.
Emmanuel, God with us.
Yeah.
That he would become an embryo.
Yeah.
That he would be born to a virgin, teenager.
Yeah.
That he would rise in stature with God and men,
Yeah.
and then he would be this fantastic teacher,
Yeah.
compelling people, give his life, die on the cross, rise from the dead. Inconceivable.
Yeah.
That God would choose to respond that way to humanity.
Yeah.
And then primarily that you're saved by grace through faith. That is inconceivable.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
What else works like that?
Right.
Nothing works like
exactly.
that. The gospel is inconceivably delightful.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's I think the best part about the message is coming to the conclusion: gospel's for everyone.
Yeah.
Nobody is excluded. everybody's welcome to this good news, not advice, good news.
Yeah, and the religious police will be all over this message.
Oh,
Wait a
100%.
minute. I don't like this. You got to tell them that, yeah, okay, you're saved by grace through faith, but you better straighten up.
Right.
You better do this. You better do that. If you don't
Yeah.
do that, man, you're in trouble. You know, and
Yeah.
it goes back to what I said before. I've made so many sacrifices, and you get to
Yes.
go out and live like that, and you get in. That's not fair.
Yeah.
Well, the gospel isn't fair
Yeah.
at its core,
Exactly.
because you're judged not by how good you are, but
Yeah.
God treats you not as you deserve,
Mhm.
but as He values every person. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think that any of us will realize how deep, wide, and exhaustive the grace of God really is till we get to heaven,
Yeah.
and then
I
we'll
agree.
look around and say, "What are you doing here?"
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
And then you'll probably say, "Why am I here?" You know?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
man, think about it. If God were really to replay your whole life and everything you've done in your life, oh man.
Yeah.
And then you'd say, boy, then you'd fall on your knees and say, "Oh, please let me in, please let me
Yeah.
in."
Yeah. Exactly. Or you'd be like, you let me in.
Yeah, exactly. These are all good stuff. I think I need to add this to the weekend sermon.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
But that was a great message.
Thanks.
Yeah. Good week.